Hi, welcome back. So in this video, we are going to be dealing with animating multiple of these trackers or shapes. So we're going to be expanding from just one shape, one object that we have here, to many, and we're going to be adjusting our function so that we can apply it to all of them. So this is actually a really simple change. All we need to do is create an array and an extra function at the beginning to fill our array with a bunch of these objects, and then modify our draw and update functions to loop through and apply it to each object. So what we're going to do first is create an array. So I'm going to call it squares for now, but again, I encourage you to get creative with this and try it with different shapes, different properties, really just be as creative as possible and use the basic skills that are taught here to your advantage. So you can go with circles or even polygons that are custom made, all sorts of things. So for now, we're just going to create an empty array. We're just going to call it squares. Now at the beginning, we're going to create a new function and we're just going to call it fill or populate maybe. So what this is going to do is we're going to loop through these squares a certain number of predetermined times and fill it with our square objects here. Now you can do this really as many times as you want. You can do whatever you want. You can set any number. You can even add arguments to this function and maybe call it somewhere later on. It depends on the complexity of your project, whether you're just doing something for fun or you're trying to integrate it into something else. But for now, I'm just going to hard code all the numbers into here. So I'm going to set a predetermined number of squares that we have. So what I'm going to do is create a for loop, and I'm just going to say for var I, start it at 0. And then we're just going to say I is less than 50. So we're going to start with 50 squares and increment it. So this is just going to create a basic loop that runs this 50 times. Now what we're going to do is add to our squares array, and then we're going to add a new object of this type. So we're going to say squares.push, since this is the method to actually add items to an array. And then we are just going to straight hard code this and copy it over. Now, if you wanted to randomize it a little bit, which we will do towards the end, what you could do is add random numbers, random sizes, everything that you want in here. So I'm just going to erase that now. So what this is going to do is basically duplicate this 50 times over so that we have 50 square tracking objects to work with. So now in our draw function, we need to reflect these changes. So just like we did it for one square, what we can do is add a loop to encapsulate all of the code we currently have in our draw function to apply it to each case. So what I'm going to do is just create another basic for loop, var I equals 0, I is less than 50, I plus plus. And then, instead of just referring to the square, we're going to refer to the array squares and then the index in our for loop, which is I, to refer to each individual square. So this is going to refer to the tracking object that is currently being iterated through in the for loop, just like that. And now all the code that we have here is basically going to be replicated just over and over again for each method and each square tracker in here. Now, just because we do it in the draw function, we also need to do it in our update function. So this is going to be a little bit of changing, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. But what you can do is the exact same thing, just change every reference to that initial variable that we had, if you're following along, to the exact index of the square we're currently iterating over in that array, just like we did here. So square, you change it to squares I. So I'm just going to speed it up slightly to get this moving. All right, so now I've replaced all the instances. So now we're referring to the actual index in our array, the index square tracking object, instead of that variable that we had set up in the last video. So the last thing we need to do before this works is actually call our populate function. Now this is called outside of our interval because this isn't a part of our loop. This is supposed to be done once at the beginning to initialize all of these objects, and then we just keep track of it in the loop that we have set up from before. So if I save, you can see So once I run it, you can see that I have the square here. Now, of course, you're not going to see 50 of these running around because they're all 50 are in the same position. So in order to give this a little variety, what we can do is use our math.random trick from before to set them up in random places around the page here. So we're going to set this to c.width and our y to c.height. And then when we refresh, you can see that we have 50 squares running around here at random. So now you can see that this is working pretty well. Now, of course, you can randomize this and have all sorts of variety and just create the best possible animation that you want. So what I'm going to do is add a couple more settings here to actually get this up and running and looking a little more fluid. So I'm going to add another variable called speed, or s, and then we're just going to set this to a random number from 1 to 4. So let's say math.random times 3 plus 1. So this is going to get a random number from 0 to 3, and then add 1 to it so that it goes from 1 to 4. So to give this a little bit more variety, I'm going to add another variable called speed, or s, and I'm just going to set this to a random number, and then we're going to add 1 to it so that it's always going 1 or above. So this is just, we're going to implement this speed variable into both the x and y coordinates so it looks a little different, a little more fluid. Now, of course, you can also set custom x and y speeds, but I feel like that's a little bit too complicated, and we just want to keep it simple as a demonstration for this video, so I'm going to be implementing this variable. So now, instead of having our plus plus, we can say equals s, or we can say equals -1 times s for going in the negative direction. You can see that it stopped there, but we can re-implement it in each of the updates and it will work fine. So we're just going to do that for the y as well. So we're going to say squares I dot y, or we need to say, sorry, not equals, but plus equals. Since we're adding to the x coordinate, we don't have an explicit s or speed variable here. So we need to add it to our x coordinate, and the speed represents the change in our coordinates. We're going to say plus equals s, and plus equals -1 times s. And then we need to refer So now we're just going to add the speed variable here. So we're going to say plus equals squares I dot s, and plus equals -1 times squares I dot s, since this is representing a change in coordinate. And so if you want to move to the left, since the way that it works in the canvas coordinate system is you need to have a negative number to subtract from the current leftmost position. Squares I dot s. We do the exact same thing for our y coordinate since we're using the same speed here. We go squares I dot s and then squares I times -1 so that you have that. So now you can see that we have a system up and running here. We have varying speeds, we have diagonal orbits, we have all sorts of things going on, and now it's starting to look like a true animation. You can adjust and tweak this to any amount that you want. You can add different speeds, you can even change the color, the size, and we're going to be adjusting this animation in future videos, of course, with our user interfacing, and we're going to be working with it to make it as good as possible. But for now, this gives you an idea of what you can do with Canvas. This is, of course, just a basic demonstration, but you can do whatever you want. You can add and work with the canvas properties to maybe adjust the length of circles that are moving around. You can change sizes, you can change colors, strokes, all sorts of things using this basic update system that I show you here. All you have to do is add properties to your object that you track, keep them in here and move them in your update function, and just use your programming knowledge to get this working and have whatever you want running in your canvas.